Hey guys, tonight we're going to dive headfirst into the dusty, echoey halls of medieval history, but with a twist. Forget the knights in shining armor and the damsels in distress for a moment. Instead, picture flickering torchlight, the rustle of heavy fabrics, and the faint, unsettling jingle of bells. You're there, in the very heart of a king's court, a place of immense power and brutal etiquette, and somewhere, just on the periphery of your vision, a figure moves with a strange, deliberate gait, their eyes twinkling with a secret knowledge. Tonight, we're pulling back the velvet curtain on the secret lives of medieval court jesters. You're about to discover a world where humor was a weapon, folly a shield, and a misplaced joke could literally cost you your head. You probably won't survive this level of medieval intrigue, but hey, that's what makes it fun, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling adventurous, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see who's listening from where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported, not by some grand magical incantation, but by the gentle hum of the fan and the soft drone of my voice, back to a time when kings ruled and, surprisingly, fools reigned. The very concept of a court jester might conjure images of a brightly dressed individual, cap and bells bobbing, perpetually ready, with a silly pun or a But that, my friend, is just the surface of a deeply complex, often perilous, and surprisingly influential role. We're talking about a profession that wasn't just about entertainment. It was about power, survival, and a very specific kind of truth-telling that nobody else dared to utter. To truly understand the medieval jester, you have to peel back centuries because their origins aren't purely medieval at all. In fact, the roots of the professional fool stretch back much, much further than chainmail and castle keeps. Think about it. Every society, it seems, has had its designated truth-teller, its designated laughter-maker, its designated boundary pusher. Even in ancient Egypt, you'd find individuals, often dwarfs or those with physical deformities, employed in noble households. They weren't necessarily jesters in the sense we understand them, with their pointed hats and bladder sticks, but they served a similar function, providing amusement, yes, but also acting as a mirror, however distorted, to the powerful. Imagine you're an ancient Roman emperor, burdened with the immense weight of ruling an empire. You're surrounded by all telling you what you want to hear. But then there's this one guy, perhaps a dwarf, a person often seen as being touched by the gods or spirits, who can say things, subtle things, that no one else can. He might mock your generals, gently poke fun at your latest decree, or even mimic your own pomposity, all without fear of immediate execution. Why? Because he's deemed innocent, or touched, or simply too inconsequential to pose a real threat. It's a fascinating paradox. Their perceived weakness was their greatest strength. This early form of permitted irreverence laid the groundwork for the medieval jester. Fast forward through the twilight of the Roman Empire, through the early stirrings of the Dark Ages, and you start to see these figures re-emerging in nascent European courts. The early medieval period, often inaccurately called the Dark Ages, was actually a time of significant cultural shifts. And with these shifts came a redefinition of power structures, and, by extension, the roles within those structures. The court, jester, as we begin to recognize them, starts to take shape not as a relic of a pagan past, but as an integral part of a new Christianized Europe. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you. One of the earliest documented instances that hints at a jester-like figure in a truly medieval European court is tied to the Frankish kings. Charlemagne, the mighty emperor who unified much of Western Europe, was known to have employed individuals who provided entertainment and, crucially, offered a unique perspective. These weren't your slapstick comedians yet. They were more likely bards, storytellers, or even individuals with genuine mental eccentricities who were kept for amusement and perhaps, in a more spiritual sense, as a reminder of the fragility of the human mind and the unpredictability of divine will. The line between entertainment and the supernatural was often blurred in those days. Now, for a quirky tidbit, during this transitional period, it wasn't uncommon for what we might call natural fools, individuals with cognitive disabilities, or mental illnesses, to be kept in courts. Their unpredictable behavior and utterances were sometimes seen as divinely inspired, or at the very least, a source of innocent amusement. It's a stark contrast to how society views such individuals today, of course, but in a world steeped in superstition and a deep belief in the inexplicable, they held a peculiar, sometimes revered, status. These fools of God, as some were called, were often protected and even cherished. Their perceived lack of filter, allowing them to speak truths others couldn't or wouldn't. This tradition of the natural fool would eventually intertwine with the rise of the artificial fool, the trained jester who consciously adopted the persona of folly. You see, the medieval world, especially in its earlier phases, was a surprisingly tactile and auditory experience. Imagine a great hall, smoky from the central fire, the air thick with the scent of roasting meat and damp wool. There's no Netflix, no radio, no TikTok to distract you. Entertainment was live, immediate, and often quite raw. The jester, in this environment, wasn't just a luxury. They were a vital part of the social fabric. They broke the tension, offered levity in often grim times, and, perhaps most importantly, provided a release valve for the stresses of court life. Think of it as ancient stress relief, but with more bells. Historians still argue whether the early medieval fool was primarily a religious figure, a shamanistic holdover, or purely an entertainer. It's a fascinating debate because it highlights the multifaceted nature of these roles. Were they conduits to the divine, speaking in riddles that held hidden truths? Or were they simply the first professional stand-up comedians, honing their craft in front of the toughest crowd imaginable, a bored, powerful, and often dangerous monarch? The truth, as is often the case, probably lies somewhere in the middle, a messy, intriguing blend of all three. The presence of these figures in early courts also speaks to a deeper human need, the need to laugh. Yes, but also the need to have someone, anyone, speak plainly, even if veiled in jest. Kings, queens, and nobles lived in an echo chamber of their own making. Everyone around them had an agenda, wanted something, or feared their wrath. The jester, by virtue of their unique position, often outside the traditional feudal hierarchy, could sometimes cut through that noise. They were the original emperor's new clothes observers, willing to point out the obvious absurdities that everyone else was too polite or too terrified to mention. So as the early medieval period gave way to the high medieval era, the role of the jester began to formalize. They weren't just random eccentrics anymore. They became professionals, individuals who were employed specifically for their wit, their comedic timing, their musical talents, or their acrobatic prowess. They were, in essence, the rock stars of their day, albeit with a significantly higher risk of losing their head if they had a bad gig. You can almost hear the court whispering, "Did you hear that jester from King Louis's court? Hilarious. But that bit about the king's new haircut, yikes." This evolving role is crucial because it marks the transition from informal amusement to a recognized court position. They had a specific place, even if that place was often on the fringes, and they had specific expectations to meet. Their existence was a testament to the court's sophistication, a demonstration that even in a world defined by chivalry and warfare, there was room for intellect, humor, and a very particular brand of social commentary. And trust me, navigating the treacherous waters of court politics with only your wit as a paddle required a level of intelligence that would surprise many who only see the surface-level antics. It was a high-stakes game, and the jester was often playing for their life. As the early medieval mists began to clear, giving way to the bustling, more organized world of the High Middle Ages, you start to see the jester's role solidify, transforming from an informal entertainer or natural fool into a distinct, often highly valued position within the royal household. Imagine yourself in the court of a powerful monarch, perhaps a French king or an English queen, surrounded by knights, ladies, courtiers, and clerics. In this tightly structured world, every individual has a place, a rank, and a prescribed set of behaviors. And then there's the jester, seemingly existing just outside these rigid boundaries, yet intricately woven into the tapestry of court life. This was the golden age for court jesters. Their influence, far from being trivial, could be surprisingly profound. They weren't just there to tell knock-knock jokes, though I'm sure some of them were masters of the medieval equivalent. Their purpose was multifaceted. They were entertainers, certainly, but also newsbearers, satirists, confidants, and even, at times, political commentators. Their unique license to speak freely, to mock the powerful without immediate repercussions, was a rare and valuable commodity in an era where dissent could lead to swift, brutal consequences. Consider the atmosphere of a medieval court. It was a place of immense formality, endless intrigue, and often stifling etiquette. Life could be tedious, punctuated by long feasts, intricate ceremonies, and strategic boredom. The jester was the much-needed jolt of unpredictability, the splash of vibrant color in a sea of solemnity. Their presence signaled that the monarch was secure enough in their power to tolerate, even encourage, a degree of irreverence. It was a subtle flex, really. Look, the king might implicitly say, "I am so mighty, so unassailable, that I can even allow myself to be mocked by my own fool." A mainstream historical fact that illustrates this point beautifully comes from England. Henry VIII, a monarch known for his rather decisive approach to marriage and descent, famously employed a jester named Will Somers. Somers was not merely a comedian. He was a trusted companion, someone who could deliver bad news or offer an unvarnished opinion when no one else dared. He even had his portrait painted alongside Henry, a remarkable testament to his standing within the court. Imagine being so close to a notoriously volatile ruler that you could joke about his latest decree without fear of losing your head. That, my friend, is serious influence. The jester's daily life was a delicate balance of performance and observation. You, as the jester, would wake each morning knowing that your employment, and perhaps your life, depended on your ability to read the room, to gauge the monarch's mood, and to deliver your wit with surgical precision. One day, you might be juggling apples and telling Bodhi tales. The next, you might be whispering a coded warning into the king's ear, hidden behind a seemingly innocent jest. It was a high-wire act, performed without a net, for a quirky or fringe tidbit. Did you know that some jesters were so highly valued that they were given their own apartments within the castle? Forget the strawful hovel in the stable. We're talking about actual, proper living quarters, sometimes even with servants. This wasn't always the case. Of course, many jesters still led itinerant lives, moving from court to court. But for the truly successful, those who had mastered the delicate art of courtly foolery, the rewards could be substantial. Imagine that you're pulling pranks and making puns, and for that you get a cozy room and a hot meal. Not a bad gig, considering the alternatives in medieval society. You probably wouldn't get a pension though. No 401k for jesters. Regrettably, the jester's unique position also stemmed from their ambiguous social standing. They often existed outside the strict class hierarchy. They weren't quite noble, not quite peasant, not quite cleric. This liminal space gave them a certain freedom. They could speak truth to power in a way that a duke or a bishop could not, precisely because they weren't seen as a political rival. Their folly was their shield, allowing them to deliver insights under the guise of foolishness. It's a classic example of using perceived weakness as a strategic advantage. Historians still argue whether jesters were primarily a reflection of medieval society's need for comic relief or a sophisticated mechanism for political commentary and social critique. It's a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? Did the demand for laughter create the jester, or did the jester's subversive humor create a new way for courts to process information and challenge norms? The complexity of their role suggests it was likely a bit of both. They were both mirrors, reflecting the court's absurdities and catalysts for subtle shifts in perspective. Think about the psychological effect a jester would have on a medieval court. In an age where life was often short, brutal, and utterly humorless, for the vast majority, the jester brought a vital element of lightness. They relieved tension, diffused arguments, and provided a much-needed break from the constant machinations of power. Imagine a tense diplomatic meeting, full of nobles glaring at each other across a table. Suddenly, the jester tumbles in, perhaps tripping over his own feet, and delivers a perfectly timed, cutting remark that somehow manages to make both sides laugh. In that moment, for a fleeting second, the walls come down, and a sliver of humanity shines through. That's the jester's magic. Their routines weren't just about slapstick either. While physical comedy and juggling were certainly part of the repertoire, the most successful jesters were masters of wordplay, riddles, songs, and even satirical poetry. They had to be quick-witted, articulate, and highly adaptable. Imagine having to improvise jokes on the spot, tailored to the specific personalities and events of the day, all while performing for an audience that held your fate in their hands. It's a level of performance anxiety that would make modern stand-up comedians quake in their boots. Is this joke too edgy? Will the king find my satire amusing or treasonous? The jester also served a critical function as a barometer of public opinion, or at least the opinion circulating within the court. Courtiers would often whisper grievances or observations to the jester, knowing that the jester, in turn, could subtly weave these sentiments into their performances. This allowed the monarch to indirectly hear criticisms or concerns that no one else would dare voice directly. The jester became a safe, albeit circuitous, conduit for information, a kind of medieval courtly intelligence agency, but with more bells and fewer cloaks and daggers. And let's not forget the sensory details. You're in the great hall, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and old timber. The sound of a lute drifts from a corner. Perhaps a dog snores by the fire. Then the jester enters. The jingle of their bells, often made of brass or silver, would announce their presence, a familiar, almost comforting sound that signaled a shift in the court's mood. Their bright, often motley, clothing would stand out against the somber richness of the courtier's attire, a visual manifestation of their unique role. They were a walking, talking, gesturing contrast to the formality surrounding them. It was a visual cue, a branding, if you will, that immediately communicated, I am the fool, and therefore I can say what I please. You might find yourself wondering, how did they even get into this profession? Well, it varied. Some were natural fools, as mentioned, kept for their inherent eccentricities. Others might have been minstrels or traveling entertainers who caught the eye of a lord or lady with their quick wit. Still others may have been educated individuals who, for whatever reason, chose this unconventional path, perhaps seeing it as a way to gain access to power or simply to exercise their intellectual prowess in a truly unique way. It wasn't a formal university degree, obviously, but it required a very particular kind of intelligence and bravery. The sheer variety of jesters during this high medieval period is also fascinating. You had the singing jesters, the dancing jesters, the acrobatic jesters, and the purely verbal jesters. Some specialized in riddles, others in biting satire. Some were gentle and sweet, others were crude and boisterous. Each one tailored their act not just to the general tastes of the court, but specifically to the personality and whims of their individual patron. Imagine having to adapt your entire comedic persona to suit the mood swings of a king or queen. Talk about a tough crowd. This adaptability was key to their survival. A jester who couldn't read the room, who misjudged a joke, or who offended the wrong person might quickly find themselves out of a job, or worse. The line between privileged truth-teller and impertinent nuisance was razor thin. It was a constant performance, both on and off stage, and the successful jester was a master of social navigation, an emotional intelligence guru centuries before the term was even invented. They had to anticipate reactions, gauge sensitivities, and deliver their punchlines with the precision of a master archer. So, you've grasped that the jester in the high Middle Ages was more than just a guy in silly pants. Their role was solidified, their presence expected, and their influence, while subtle, was real. Now, let's zoom in on the specific tools of their trade, their wit and wisdom. Because while a tumble or a song might get a chuckle, it was the sharpness of their mind that truly kept them relevant, respected, and, crucially, alive in the treacherous world of court politics. Imagine you're the jester. You stand before a king, perhaps brooding after a military setback, or a queen, perhaps irritated by a scandalous rumor. Your job isn't just to entertain, it's to cut through the tension, to offer a fresh perspective, or to deliver a difficult truth cloaked in humor. This required not only immense intelligence, but also an acute understanding of human nature, a kind of medieval applied psychology. You had to know precisely when to push, when to pull back, and when to simply offer a distracting giggle. The jesters' most potent weapon was language. They were masters of wordplay, puns, riddles, clever rhymes, and satirical verses. Think of it as the ultimate improv comedy show, but with much higher stakes. A good jester could turn a phrase, twist a proverb, or coin a new idiom on the spot, eliciting laughter that could diffuse a tense situation or subtly highlight a folly. This wasn't stand-up in a modern club. It was stand-up in a throne room, where the audience was armed and capable of deciding your fate. Consider the art of the pun, simple, yes, but effective. In a court where formal language, often obscured, meaning a well-placed pun, could expose a double entendre or highlight an absurdity with disarming speed. It was a way of saying, look at this silliness right under your nose, without overtly challenging authority, or perhaps a riddle designed not just to entertain, but to subtly comment on a courtier's greed or a king's latest decree, forcing those listening to think without explicitly stating the jester's opinion, a mainstream historical fact. One of the most famous examples of a jester's sharp wit in action comes from the court of Louis XII of France. His jester, Calit, was legendary for his ability to offer blunt advice. On one occasion, when the king was complaining about being troubled by his enemies, Calit reportedly responded, "If your majesty will dismiss from your service those who betray you and those who take bribes, you will have no enemies left." Imagine the gasps in the room. Only a jester could get away with such a direct, scathing assessment of the king's own court without being immediately thrown into the dungeon. This wasn't just a joke. It was a potent piece of counsel, delivered with the unique immunity of the fool. Beyond mere jokes, jesters were often skilled storytellers. They would weave narratives, sometimes allegorical, sometimes overtly humorous, that contained veiled criticisms or moral lessons. They might tell a tale about a foolish farmer and his greedy neighbor, knowing full well that the king would recognize the thinly disguised characters representing a troublesome duke and his conniving minister. This allowed for social commentary to bypass the formal channels of complaint or petition, reaching the monarch directly through the medium of entertainment. It's like a medieval political cartoon, but performed live and in person. Now for a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some jesters were known for their mastery of what was called learned folly. This wasn't just about being funny. It was about demonstrating a deep, often classical, education. These jesters might quote Latin, recite philosophy, or engage in complex theological debates, all while maintaining their persona of the fool. They would use their intellectual prowess to twist logic, expose hypocrisy, and confound their more pompous counterparts in court. Imagine a jester interrupting a dry, scholarly discussion with a perfectly timed, intellectually devastating, yet hilarious interjection. It showcased their brilliance, reminding everyone that their folly was a chosen mask, not a true lack of intellect. It's a bit like a modern comedian with a PhD in astrophysics, using their knowledge to craft incredibly intelligent jokes. Historians still argue whether the jester's wisdom was genuinely valued as counsel, or merely tolerated as a convenient outlet for harmless dissent. Was the king truly listening to Calet's advice, or was he just amused by the jester's audacity? The answer probably lies in the individual dynamics of each court. A wise monarch might indeed extract valuable insights from their fool, recognizing the truth beneath the jest. A tyrannical one might only enjoy the entertainment, oblivious to any deeper meaning, or even punish the jester if the truth stung too much. The jester had to be incredibly adept at reading their patron. Their observational skills were paramount. A jester had to be a keen observer of human behavior, of the intricate power plays unfolding around them. They noticed the subtle glances, the hushed conversations, the shifting alliances. This constant intake of information fed their wit, allowing them to tailor their humor to the specific foibles and secret anxieties of the courtiers. They were like the court's resident anthropologist and satirist rolled into one, constantly collecting data and turning it into gold, or at least into a laugh that kept them from the gallows. The physical aspects of their performance shouldn't be overlooked either, as they contributed to the overall effect of their wisdom. While language was primary, physical comedy, juggling, acrobatics, and even playing musical instruments, the lute or pipe and tabor were common, served to soften the blow of their sharper observations. It allowed them to deliver a cutting remark, then immediately break the tension with a pratfall, making it harder for the target to take offense. It's a classic misdirection technique, a brilliant way to deliver medicine disguised as candy. Think of the jester as a kind of social lubricator. In a world of rigid hierarchy and constant vigilance, the jester's presence could lighten the mood, create shared moments of laughter, and even subtly critique the very structures that defined medieval life. Their ability to mock sacred cows, be it the pompous bishop, the cowardly knight, or even the monarch's latest fashion faux pas, provided a much-needed release valve for the collective tensions of the court. Without such an outlet, who knows what simmering resentments might have boiled over? The psychological aspect of their wisdom is also worth pondering. The jester's role was often to remind the powerful of their own humanity, their own fallibility. In a world where rulers were often seen as divinely appointed and infallible, the jester served as a humble, earthy counterpoint. By highlighting absurdities and embracing folly, they subtly implied that no one, not even the king, was entirely above human weakness and occasional ridiculousness. It was a vital, grounding influence in an environment prone to inflated egos and dangerous delusions of grandeur. You're starting to see, I hope, that the job was incredibly demanding. It wasn't just about being funny, it was about being intelligent, observant, adaptable, courageous, and emotionally intelligent. A truly wise jester knew exactly how far they could push the boundaries of humor without crossing into dangerous territory. They understood the power dynamics of the court intimately, and used their unique position to navigate them with astounding skill. This isn't just entertainment, it's a strategic art form. They also played a crucial role in maintaining morale, especially in times of war or plague. Imagine a court gripped by fear and despair. The jester, even if trembling inside, would be expected to lighten the mood, to offer a moment of levity. This wasn't easy. It required genuine courage and resilience. Their humor could be a form of escapism, a brief respite from grim reality. But it could also be a way of finding strength in the face of adversity, proving that even in the darkest times, laughter could persist. Consider the jesters' self-awareness. They were consciously playing a role, the role of the fool. But this very act of playing the fool often revealed a profound understanding of wisdom. By embracing the persona of ignorance, they could highlight the true ignorance or hypocrisy of those around them. It was a philosophical stance in itself, suggesting that sometimes, to truly see, one must pretend not to see at all. This kind of nuanced performance speaks volumes about the intelligence and philosophical depth some of these jesters possessed. And remember, their wisdom wasn't always delivered in outright jokes. Sometimes it was a subtle gesture, a raised eyebrow, a knowing glance that communicated volumes to those who were truly paying attention. It was the art of the unspoken, the power of implication. They could plant a seed of an idea, a doubt, or a revelation, and let it germinate in the minds of the courtiers, without ever overtly stating their intention. This kind of communication required a deep connection with their audience, a shared understanding of the unspoken rules of the court. So, the next time you picture a medieval jester, don't just see the bells and the bright colors. See the razor-sharp mind, the keen observer, the master of language, the courageous truth-teller. See the individual who, through sheer wit and wisdom, carved out a unique and powerful niche in a world that had little room for unconventional thinkers. Their humor wasn't merely for entertainment. It was a sophisticated tool for navigating power, revealing truth, and, in a strange, roundabout way, holding the powerful accountable. Now that you've got a handle on the jester's intellectual prowess, let's talk about their visual identity. Their costumes, props, and symbolism weren't just random choices. They were carefully crafted elements that amplified their performance, communicated their role, and offered subtle layers of meaning in a highly symbolic age. Imagine the sensory explosion as you, the courtier, watch the jester make their entrance. It's not just a person walking in. It's a living, breathing spectacle designed to immediately capture your attention and disarm your expectations. The most iconic piece of jester attire, of course, is the motley costume. This wasn't just a quirky fashion choice. It was deeply symbolic. Motley, characterized by its patchwork of contrasting, often bright colors, think red, yellow, green, blue, all stitched together, stood in stark opposition to the somber, monochromatic, and strictly regulated dress codes of the nobility and clergy. While a lord might wear deep crimson velvet or a cleric austere black wool, the jester's clothing screamed defiance of convention. It was a visual representation of their liminal status. They didn't fit into any single societal category, so their clothes reflected that delightful chaos. It was a visual pun, really, declaring, "I'm a mix of everything, just like my humor." This riot of color served a practical purpose too. It made them highly visible, In a crowded, dimly lit great hall, you couldn't miss the jester. Their outfit announced their presence, drawing all eyes to them, creating an instant stage even before they uttered a single word. It was their branding, their medieval equivalent of a superhero costume, signaling that a break from formality was about to occur. Then there's the coxcomb hood, often adorned with donkey ears or a rooster's comb, and, most famously, bells. The hood itself was a visual representation of foolishness, hearkening back to the image of the simpleton or the animalistic, unthinking creature. The donkey ears symbolized stubbornness or stupidity, while the rooster's comb implied vanity or a loud, boastful nature. But the jester, in wearing it, subverted these meanings. They were the wise fool, wearing the trappings of folly to reveal deeper truths. It's like wearing a dunce cap to teach a philosophy lesson, and the bells, oh, the omnipresent jingle of the jester's bells. These weren't just decorative, they were auditory cues. Their ringing announced the jester's approach, creating an immediate atmosphere of anticipation. The sound itself was cheerful, almost childlike, instantly distinguishing the jester from the rustle of noble silks or the clink of knightly armor. A mainstream historical fact, the jingle of bells on a jester's cap and clothing became so synonymous with the role that the phrase "to bell the cat," meaning to take on a dangerous task, is thought by some to have roots in the jester's bold, noisy presence in dangerous courts. The bells were a constant reminder of their presence, an auditory watermark of their unique freedom. Their props were just as significant as their attire. The most common was the marotte, or fool's scepter. This was essentially a short stick topped with a carved head, often a miniature version of the jester's own head, or sometimes a grotesquely exaggerated face, complete with a tiny jester's cap and bells. The marotte was a mock symbol of authority, a parody of the monarch's own scepter. When the jester held their marotte, they were playfully asserting a ridiculous, yet strangely potent, form of power. It allowed them to engage in mock debates, to consult their own tiny fool, or to tap it playfully against a king's knee, all actions that would be unthinkable from anyone else. It was their microphone, their puppet, and their non-verbal punchline all rolled into one. Imagine a king making a grand pronouncement, and the jester gravely consulting his marotte before nodding sagely in mock agreement. Brilliant. Other props included musical instruments like the lute or a small drum tabor, allowing them to accompany their songs or provide musical interludes. They might also carry a bladder stick, a stick with an inflated animal bladder tied to the end, used for playful thwacks and mock assaults on courtiers or even the monarch. This seemingly innocuous prop allowed for physical comedy and a touch of harmless aggression, further breaking down barriers and reminding everyone not to take themselves too seriously. You probably wouldn't survive a slap from a duke's gauntlet, but a playful tap from a jester's bladder stick. That was an invitation to laugh. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, some jesters were rumored to have intricate, hidden compartments in their costumes, or marottes used to conceal notes, small gifts, or even secret messages. While this might verge into the realm of folklore, for most, it speaks to the perception of the jester as a figure who operated on the fringes, capable of surprising and subversive acts. Imagine the monarch receiving a jester's jibe, then finding a tiny, crumpled note slipped into their hand during a feigned stumble. a note that contained actual, serious information. It highlights the potential for jesters to be more than just entertainers. They could be conduits for clandestine communication. Historians still argue whether the elaborate symbolism of the jester's costume was always consciously designed by the jesters themselves, or if it evolved organically from popular traditions of folk humor and carnival figures. Was it a calculated strategy, or a gradual accretion of recognizable tropes? It's likely a bit of both, with individual jesters adapting and refining the visual language to suit their own talents and the specific dynamics of their court. The beauty of it is that it worked, regardless of its precise origin. The appearance, in its totality, was a performance in itself. Every element, from the clashing colors to the jingling bells, was a deliberate choice to set them apart, to make them instantly recognizable as the licensed lunatic. This visual distinction was crucial because it immediately communicated to everyone in the court. This person operates under different rules. What they say and do should be interpreted differently. It provided a kind of psychological safe harbor for their often daring humor. Think about the contrast. You're in a court where everyone is dressed to reflect their status. Every garment and jewel meticulously chosen to signal wealth, power, and adherence to strict social norms. Then, bursting into this ordered world, comes the jester, a living, breathing defiance of those norms. Their appearance was a constant, visual reminder of the thin line between order and chaos, between sanity and madness, between power and absurdity. It invited the court, for a brief moment, to step outside its rigid confines and embrace the unconventional. The jester's costume also allowed for a form of anonymity. Paradoxically, despite its flamboyance, by adopting such a distinct, almost theatrical persona, the individual behind the mask could, to some extent, shed their own identity and become the fool. This allowed them to speak more freely, as if the words weren't coming from their personal self, but from the archetypal figure of folly. It's a psychological trick, a kind of dramatic distancing that provided both protection and enhanced their ability to deliver uncomfortable truths. You might wonder if these costumes were comfortable. Probably not always. They were likely hot, heavy, and a bit cumbersome, especially with all those bells. But the discomfort was part of the dedication to the role, a small price to pay for the unique freedom and influence it afforded, and for the visual impact it created. They weren't just wearing clothes. They were embodying a concept. The symbolism extended to the very name, jester itself, which comes from the old French word, geste, meaning a tale or story, indicating their role as storytellers and purveyors of narratives. They were living allegories, walking metaphors for the human condition, with all its inherent absurdities and contradictions. Their appearance reinforced this. They looked like a story, a vibrant, unpredictable narrative waiting to unfold. The visual language of the jester also played into popular medieval festivals and folk traditions, like the Feast of Fools, where social roles were temporarily inverted and commoners could mock authority with impunity. The jester's costume brought a touch of that carnivalesque liberation into the otherwise rigid court. It was a controlled chaos, a sanctioned subversion that allowed a momentary release of social pressure. You could almost feel the collective sigh of relief in the hall when the jester entered, knowing that for a little while the stifling formality might loosen its grip. Furthermore, the materials used for their costumes, while bright, might not always have been of the finest quality, especially for less affluent jesters. Often, it would be sturdy wool or linen, pieced together from scraps, further emphasizing their outsider status compared to the noble silks and furs. Yet, the overall effect was one of deliberate, eye-catching spectacle, regardless of the individual. Fabric's value. It was about the statement, not the cost. So, when you picture the medieval court jester, remember that their look was as carefully constructed as their jokes. It was a potent blend of tradition, symbolism, and psychological strategy, designed to make them stand out, to signal their unique license, and to embody the very essence of wise folly. Every jingle of a bell, every vibrant patch of color, every ridiculous gesture with their marotte contributed to a performance that was far more profound than mere entertainment. It was a living, breathing piece of social commentary, wrapped in a bright, jingling package. You've seen the jester's wit, their carefully crafted appearance, and how their role stood out in the high Middle Ages. But now, let's dig a little deeper, moving beyond the laughter and the colorful costumes to uncover a surprisingly intimate aspect of their lives, their role beyond the laughter as confidants. This is where the jester sheds the cap and bells, metaphorically speaking, and steps into the quiet, hushed chambers of power, becoming a trusted advisor and, at times, the keeper of royal secrets. Imagine, for a moment, the immense isolation of a monarch, surrounded by courtiers, all vying for favor, all with their own agendas. It was incredibly difficult to find someone who would offer an honest, unbiased opinion. Everyone else had too much to lose or too much to gain by telling the king or queen only what they wanted to hear. This is precisely where the jester, with their unique, often ambiguous, social standing, found their deepest utility. They were perceived as largely outside the traditional power struggles, allowing them a level of perceived neutrality that no duke, bishop, or general could ever claim. The jester's success wasn't just about making people laugh. It was about building a relationship of trust with their patron. Over years, through countless performances and private moments, a bond could form, allowing the monarch to see the sharp mind and loyal heart beneath the layers of intentional folly. It was a subtle, slow-burn process, but when it solidified, it transformed the jester from a mere entertainer into an invaluable resource. They became a sounding board, a conscience, and sometimes the only person the monarch felt they could truly speak candidly with. Instagram historical fact that highlights this confidant role is the relationship between Mary, Queen of Scots, and her dwarf jester, French John. While jester might be a broad term for some dwarf companions of the era, French John was clearly more than just a novelty. He was a constant presence by Mary's side, even accompanying her during her imprisonment. Such steadfast companionship, enduring through the tumultuous political landscape she navigated, points to a deep level of trust and emotional reliance. He was privy to her private moments, her sorrows, and perhaps even her clandestine thoughts. This kind of access speaks volumes about the intimate bond that could develop. Think of it from the monarch's perspective. You're burdened by decisions of war and peace, dynastic marriages, and rebellious nobles. You can't show weakness. You can't admit doubt to your ministers. But with the jester, in the privacy of your chambers, perhaps after a long, draining day, you could let your guard down. You could ask a seemingly ridiculous question or vent a frustration, and the jester, in their characteristic style, might offer a surprisingly insightful answer or simply a knowing, empathetic silence. Their ability to switch from boisterous entertainer to quiet, attentive listener was paramount for a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some accounts suggest that jesters were occasionally used as discreet messengers or spies within the court itself, because they could roam freely, seemingly innocuous, and were often overlooked in serious conversations. They might overhear whispers or observe suspicious activities that no one else would notice. Imagine a jester casually strolling through a private gathering, seemingly absorbed in a childish game, but actually absorbing every hushed word, and then, later, reporting back to the monarch in a jocular, yet informative manner. It makes sense, doesn't it? Who would suspect the fool? It's like the ultimate medieval stealth operation, but with bells. Historians still argue whether the jester's role as a confidant was truly a deliberate strategy on the part of monarchs, or if it simply evolved organically from the unique nature of the jester-patron relationship. Was it a calculated move to have an unofficial advisor, or simply the natural outcome of having someone around who could be trusted? It likely varied, but the consistent presence of trusted jesters across different courts suggests that monarchs intuitively understood the value of such a figure. The jester's capacity for empathy was also key. While they might mock and satirize, the best jesters also possessed a profound understanding of human emotions. They could discern the underlying anxieties of their patron, the unspoken fears that plagued the royal mind. This allowed them to offer comfort, distraction, or even a moment of shared vulnerability. It wasn't always about delivering a joke. Sometimes it was about simply being there, a loyal presence in an otherwise lonely existence at the pinnacle of power. Consider the dynamic of a private conversation between a jester and a monarch. The jester might use humor as a way to broach sensitive subjects. Instead of saying, "Your Majesty, your advisor is corrupt," they might tell a story about a greedy fox and a gullible farmer, subtly drawing parallels to the court's situation. This indirect approach allowed the monarch to absorb the message without feeling directly challenged or confronted, preserving their dignity while still receiving vital information. It was a masterclass in soft power. Furthermore, jesters, by virtue of their position, often had access to a wide range of information. They interacted with everyone from kitchen staff to visiting ambassadors, picking up gossip, rumors, and observations that might never reach the monarch through official channels. They were, in a way, the original court gossip columnists, but with the added benefit of being able to distill that information into digestible, often humorous forms for their patron. This informal intelligence network made them incredibly valuable. The trust extended to personal secrets as well. Monarchs, like anyone else, had their private worries, their romantic troubles, their family squabbles. Who could they confide in without fear of betrayal or scandal? Often it was the jester, because the jester's power was derived solely from the monarch's favor. They had little incentive to betray confidences to other courtiers. Their loyalty was, in a sense, a matter of self-preservation. This made them a remarkably safe repository for secrets that could never be shared elsewhere. You might find yourself picturing a scene. The monarch, late at night, unable to sleep, calls for their jester, not for entertainment, but for conversation. The jester arrives, perhaps rubbing the sleep from their eyes, and listens. They don't offer platitudes or flattery. Instead, they might offer a wry observation, a simple, profound question, or just a shared moment of silence that speaks louder than words. It was in these quiet moments that the true depth of the jester's role as a confidant was forged. Their perceived lack of ambition was also a key factor in their trustworthiness. Unlike ambitious nobles, who might use a monarch's weakness against them, the jester typically sought no land, no titles, no political power. Their job was simply to be the fool, and by doing so, they gained a unique kind of influence. This lack of overt ambition made them seem less threatening, and therefore more reliable. It's a testament to the complex psychology of medieval court life, where the powerless could sometimes wield the greatest, if indirect, power. This relationship wasn't always one-sided either. The jester, too, might find a surprising level of comfort and protection from their patron. In a world where their livelihood was precarious and their status often ridiculed by others, the monarch's direct favor offered a powerful shield. This reciprocal loyalty deepened the bond, creating a unique partnership that transcended the rigid social norms of the age. The very nature of their folly also helped solidify their role as confidants, because their pronouncements were often couched in humor or absurdity. Anything they said, even if deeply profound, could be dismissed as just the fool talking if overheard by others. This allowed for incredibly sensitive information or advice to be exchanged under the radar of the watchful court. It was a form of plausible deniability for the monarch, and a shield for the jester. So, while the image of the jester as a performer is iconic, remember the quiet moments, the hushed conversations, and the shared confidences. It was in these private spaces that the jester truly became indispensable, not just as a source of laughter, but as a loyal advisor, a trusted friend, and a silent guardian of royal secrets. They were the unsung therapists of the medieval court, helping monarchs navigate the immense pressures of power with a blend of humor, wisdom, and genuine human connection. It's a far cry from just telling silly jokes, isn't it? You've delved into the jester's wit, their symbolic garb, and even their surprising role as royal confidants. But now, let's turn our attention to the flip side of that jingling coin, the dark side of the jest, the inherent danger and ever-present possibility of disgrace. Because for all their privilege and influence, the jester walked a perilous tightrope, and a single misstep could lead to ruin, imprisonment, or even death. This wasn't a job for the faint of heart. It was a constant, high-stakes negotiation. With power, imagine you are the jester, basking in the warm glow of the monarch's favor one moment, only to feel the icy chill of their displeasure the next. The medieval court was a notoriously volatile environment, driven by ego, ambition, and often brutal caprice. A joke that landed perfectly one day could be deemed an unforgivable insult the next, depending entirely on the monarch's mood, the political climate, or the machinations of jealous courtiers. There was no HR department, no union to protect you. Your safety net was literally your wit, and sometimes even that wasn't enough. The primary danger stemmed from the very license. They were granted the freedom to speak truth to power. While this was their unique strength, it was also their gravest vulnerability. You could mock a duke's ill-fitting doublet, or even gently chide the king's gluttony. But what if your jest inadvertently touched upon a truly sensitive matter? A king's legitimacy, a queen's fidelity, or a major political blunder that had disastrous consequences. The line between clever satire and outright treason was incredibly fine, and it often shifted without warning. A mainstream historical fact illustrates this precariousness with chilling clarity. The Jester of Louis XIII of France, Honor de Buell, Seigneur de Rocquin, while perhaps not suffering a fatal end directly due to a jest, faced royal displeasure and periods of banishment. His biting wit and satirical observations, though initially tolerated, could sometimes cross a line. Rocquin's experiences, and those of others who faced similar fates, highlight that the jester's immunity was always conditional, granted at the monarch's pleasure, and could be revoked without warning. You might be the king's favorite fool, but you were still the king's fool, and he held ultimate power over your existence. Consider the sheer psychological pressure. Every performance, every interaction was an audition for continued survival. You had to gauge the mood of a room, assess the target's temperament, and deliver your material with absolute precision. Was the king truly amused, or was that forced smile a prelude to anger? Were the courtiers laughing with you or at you, waiting for you to trip up? The constant vigilance, the need to anticipate reactions and manage risks must have been exhausting. It's like performing stand-up comedy, knowing that hecklers might literally have you executed. Talk about a tough crowd. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, there are scattered anecdotal accounts, often difficult to verify, of jesters being punished in surprisingly cruel ways, not always with execution, but with forms of public humiliation or disfigurement designed to strip them of their ability to perform. Imagine a jester whose tongue was subtly altered, making it difficult for them to speak clearly, or whose hands were injured, preventing them from juggling. These punishments, rather than outright execution, were designed to strip them of the very tools of their trade, leaving them alive but professionally crippled. It's a chilling thought to be silenced, not by death, but by the destruction of your craft. Historians still argue whether the perceived immunity of the jester was a genuine legal or social privilege, or merely a customary tolerance that could be withdrawn at any moment. Was it an enshrined right, or a fragile illusion? The evidence suggests it was more of the latter, a privilege earned through skillful performance and careful navigation, not an inherent right protected by law. This makes their success all the more remarkable, as they carved out a space for themselves based solely on their unique utility and charm. Jealousy from other courtiers was another constant threat. The jester, by virtue of their direct access to the monarch and their privileged position, could easily become the target of envy and resentment. Nobles, who had to adhere to strict protocols and could not speak as freely, might despise the jesters, perceived insolence, or the monarch's affection for them. A whisper in the right ear, a subtle misrepresentation of a jester's words, could easily turn royal favor into royal wrath. It was a constant game of medieval survivor, and the jester was always a potential target for elimination. Disgrace could come in many forms. Losing royal favor might mean banishment from court, leaving the jester jobless and without protection. Imagine going from the warmth and privilege of the royal household to being cast out into the cold, a lone figure with nowhere to go. For many, especially those who had spent their lives in service, this was a devastating blow, a social death. It meant returning to a life of poverty or trying to find a new patron, which was by no means guaranteed. Economic precariousness was also a factor. While some jesters were well paid and lived comfortably, many others were essentially servants, dependent entirely on the whims of their employer. Their income was often variable, their tenure insecure, a bad performance, a period of royal austerity, or the monarch simply growing tired of them could leave them destitute. There was no stability, no guaranteed career path. You might be dining on roasted swan one day and foraging for roots the next. Furthermore, the jester was often expected to perform in all circumstances, regardless of their own physical or emotional state. Illness, personal sorrow, or exhaustion were not excuses. The monarch's demand for amusement superseded the jester's personal well-being. This constant pressure to be on, to maintain a cheerful and witty demeanor, even when facing personal hardship, added another layer of burden to their already demanding role. It's like being a comedian who has to perform a gig after a terrible breakup, but with medieval stakes. The very nature of their act, which involved often body humor and mock impiety, could also attract the ire of the clergy. In a deeply religious society, jokes about the church or sacred figures, even if meant playfully, could be seen as blasphemous. While monarchs often shielded their jesters from such accusations, it was a constant undertone of potential condemnation, a theological tightrope walked alongside the political one. And let's not forget the physical dangers. While not directly targeted in most cases, jesters often engaged in physical comedy, acrobatics, and even mock fights. A misstep, a clumsy fall, or an accidental injury during a performance could be debilitating, ending their career or leading to chronic pain. The bladder stick might be harmless, but a bad landing from a juggle could be disastrous. Their body was part of their instrument, and like any instrument, it could break. You might be thinking, why would anyone choose such a dangerous profession? And it's a valid question. The answer lies in the unique opportunities it presented. For some, it offered a path to escape the drudgery of peasant life, a chance to rise above their station, to live in comfort, and to interact directly with the most powerful figures in the land. For others, it might have been an innate calling, an irresistible urge to entertain, to observe, and to speak uncomfortable truths. The rewards, when they came, were significant, even if fleeting. The constant threat of disgrace also highlighted the unique power dynamic. The monarch, by allowing the jester to speak freely, demonstrated their own magnanimity and security, but by always holding the threat of punishment over the jester's head, they reinforced their ultimate authority. It was a subtle, psychological game of control, with the jester as the pawns and the prize. So, while the image of the jovial jester might be appealing, remember the shadow that constantly loomed over their jingling bells. The life of a medieval court jester was a testament to extraordinary courage, quick thinking, and a remarkable ability to navigate a treacherous world. They lived on the edge, their existence a testament to the fragile balance between freedom and control wit, and consequence. And for every successful joke, you can be sure there was a moment of quiet fear, a silent calculation of risk, a prayer that the laughter would not turn to wrath. Having explored the inherent dangers and precariousness of the jester's life, let's now pivot to a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of court folly: the presence of women jesters. When you conjure an image of a medieval jester, it's almost always a man, isn't it? Cap and bells, motley, a bladder stick, all very masculine imagery. Yet, women were indeed part of this intriguing profession, sometimes as natural fools, sometimes as trained entertainers, and their stories, though scarcer, add a crucial layer to our understanding of the jester's world. Imagine a bustling medieval court filled with the usual retinue of lords, ladies, and squires, and then, among them, a woman, perhaps dressed in similar, colorful attire, or perhaps in something more subtly distinct, her wit as sharp, or her physical comedy as engaging as any male counterpart. Her presence would have been even more striking, given the rigid gender roles and limited opportunities for women in medieval society. This wasn't just about entertainment. It was about a woman carving out a unique, powerful, and perilous space for herself. The historical records for female jesters, or foolish women as they were sometimes called, are undeniably sparser than those for men. This isn't necessarily because they were fewer in number, but often because their roles might have been less formally recorded, or they were simply overlooked by male chroniclers who prioritized the exploits of men. However, the records that do exist offer tantalizing glimpses into their lives and influence, a mainstream historical fact. One of the most prominent examples of a female jester figure is Matilda de Courtenay, who served as a jester for Count Philip I of Flanders in the 12th century. While details of her specific performances are scant, her very existence in a formal court setting indicates that women were indeed recognized for their ability to provide entertainment and witty commentary. She wasn't just a lady in waiting. She held a distinct, perhaps humorous role within the Count's retinue. Her story, fragmented though it is, proves that the concept of the female fool was not entirely alien to medieval sensibilities. You see, for women, the path to becoming a jester was even more fraught with social barriers. Most medieval women were expected to marry, manage households, or enter religious orders. A career as a traveling entertainer or a court resident who openly mocked authority was a radical departure from these norms. It required immense courage, unconventional talent, and perhaps a genuine disdain for societal expectations. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, sometimes female fools were women suffering from mental illnesses or developmental disabilities, considered natural fools akin to their male counterparts. These women were often maintained in noble households, not always for entertainment in the modern sense, but for the amusement their unpredictable behavior provided, or out of a mix of pity and religious conviction. Their utterances might be seen as divinely inspired, or simply as a source of diverting eccentricity. This highlights a darker, more complex aspect of the fool tradition, where vulnerability was often intertwined with amusement. It's a reminder that not all jesters, male or female, chose their path willingly. Some were simply born into it, or found themselves in circumstances that led them there. Historians still argue whether female jesters held the same level of intellectual and political influence as their male counterparts, or if their roles were primarily restricted to lighter entertainment and domestic amusement. Were they given the same license to speak truth to power, or were their jests expected to be less cutting, less challenging? The scarcity of detailed records makes a definitive answer elusive, but the very fact of their presence suggests at least some degree of recognized talent and utility beyond mere decorative presence. It's a crucial area for further research, pushing back against the traditional, male-dominated narrative of medieval history. The motivations for a woman to become a jester could have been varied. For some, it might have been a means of survival, a way to earn a living in a world with limited options, especially if they were unmarried, widowed, or had no family support. For others, it might have been a genuine passion for performance, an outlet for a sharp mind and an irrepressible sense of humor. And for a select few, perhaps those with a patron who valued their intellect, it could have been a path to a surprisingly influential position, where their wit afforded them a unique form of power. Consider the challenges they would have faced. Not only did they navigate the general dangers of court life, but they also contended with prevailing misogynistic attitudes. Their humor might have been dismissed as frivolous, their intelligence underestimated, and their very presence seen as an anomaly. They likely had to work twice as hard to prove their worth, to demonstrate that a woman could be as witty, as insightful, and as effective a truth-teller as any man. It's an early example of breaking glass ceilings, but with a lot more risk. Their performances might have incorporated elements unique to their gender, perhaps satirizing the foibles of ladies of the court, or offering a feminine perspective on courtly love and marriage. Imagine a female jester cleverly commenting on the absurdities of arranged marriages, or subtly mocking the pretenses of courtly chivalry from a woman's point of view. This would have added a fresh, perhaps even more biting dimension to the usual jester repertoire. The clothing of female jesters also remains a subject of some conjecture. While male jesters famously wore motley, did women jesters adopt a similar, exaggerated attire, or something more tailored to contemporary female fashion, but still distinctive? It's likely there was variation, depending on the specific court and the jester's individual style. Perhaps a brightly colored gown with bells, or a distinctive headpiece, would have served the same purpose as the male jester's cap and bells, to set them apart visually and signal their unique role. The support system for a female jester would have been crucial. A male jester relied on the monarch's favor. A female jester would have needed that, plus perhaps the protection or patronage of a queen or influential noblewoman. Having a female patron who valued their unique skills might have offered a vital shield against the skepticism or hostility of others in the court. This patronage could have made all the difference between a fleeting presence and a sustained career. You can almost feel the whispers. Look, there's the king's new foolish woman. I wonder what she say today. The initial curiosity, perhaps even skepticism, would quickly give way to recognition. If her wit was indeed sharp, their success would have been a testament not just to their own talent, but also to the open-mindedness of their patrons, a rare quality in a period known for its rigid social structures. The existence of female jesters also challenges our modern perception of medieval gender roles. It reminds us that while societal constraints were immense, there were always individuals who found ways to transcend them, to carve out lives that defied expectation. The female jester was a subversive figure, embodying a kind of intellectual and professional freedom that was largely unavailable to most women of the era. Their legacy might be less well documented, but it is no less significant. They represent the diversity of medieval court life and the universal human need for laughter, truth, and genuine connection, regardless of gender. They remind us that intelligence and wit know no boundaries, and that even in the most restrictive environments, individuals can find ways to express themselves and exert influence. So, when you picture the medieval court, try to expand your mental image beyond the traditional male jester. See the female figures, the women who, through their courage, their humor, and their unique perspectives, carved out a place for themselves in history. They might have been rarer, their stories harder to find, but their contribution to the vibrant tapestry of medieval court life was undeniably real and just as daring. They truly were pioneers, pushing boundaries not just of comedy, but of gender expectations in a world that rarely offered such opportunities. We've uncovered the intellectual prowess, the symbolic attire, the dangerous tightrope walk, and even the often hidden presence of female jesters. Now, let's get to the true heart of the jester's power, their ability to challenge authority. This wasn't about outright rebellion. It was a far more nuanced, sophisticated form of critique, a subtle dance on the edge of sedition, all cloaked in the acceptable guise of folly. You're about to see how a jingle of bells could often deliver a more potent message than 1,000 nightly protests. Imagine yourself as a powerful noble in a medieval court. You're acutely aware of the king's arbitrary power, the constant need to flatter, to agree, to avoid offense. To speak truth, especially unpalatable truth, is to invite wrath, suspicion, or even imprisonment. Yet the jester, seemingly a figure of jest and merriment, can say things that would get anyone else locked in the deepest dungeon. How? Because their foolishness was their ultimate shield. It allowed them to deliver biting satire, pointed questions, and uncomfortable observations under the pretense of being too simple or too mad to know any better. This unique license to speak freely was earned, not given lightly. It was a testament to the jester's skill that they could consistently walk this razor-thin line, pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable without toppling over into outright defiance. They used humor as a weapon, softening the blow of criticism, making it digestible, and sometimes even making it impossible for the target to react with anger without appearing equally foolish. It's a classic case of using an unexpected approach to achieve an otherwise impossible outcome. A mainstream historical fact that beautifully illustrates this is the story of Archie Armstrong, jester to King James I and Charles I of England. Archie was renowned for his sharp wit and his fearless critiques of royal policies and ministers. He famously mocked powerful figures like Archbishop Laud, even when doing so put him in direct opposition to the king's preferences, while his eventual downfall proved the limits of his license. He was banished for his persistent insolence and perceived meddling in affairs of state. His long career demonstrates the incredible scope jesters had to challenge authority. For decades, he was essentially the king's uncontrolled media outlet, saying what others wouldn't dare. Consider the psychological game at play. When a jester mocked a powerful figure, or even the monarch themselves, it wasn't just about getting a laugh. It was about deflating ego, exposing hypocrisy, and reminding the powerful that they, too, were subject to human frailties and absurdities. In a court where flatterers abounded, the jester was the constant reminder of reality, however uncomfortable that reality might be. They were the emperor's new clothes detectors, pointing out the naked truth with a mischievous twinkle in their eye. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, some jesters would employ elaborate, almost theatrical metaphors to deliver their critiques, rather than directly saying your new tax is impoverishing the peasants. A jester might tell a lengthy, seemingly nonsensical story about a flock of sheep being shorn so closely that they caught a chill, all the while casting significant glances at the king and his treasurer. This indirect approach allowed for plausible deniability if the joke landed badly, but still conveyed the message to those astute enough to understand. It was like a medieval coded message delivered right in front of everyone. Historians still argue whether the jester's capacity to challenge authority was primarily a deliberate strategy by monarchs to gain candid feedback, or if it was an unintended byproduct of the jester's unique social position. Was it a calculated risk for the king to keep a truth-teller, or did the jester simply exploit a loophole in court etiquette? The reality is likely a blend of both. A wise monarch would recognize the value of unfiltered feedback, even if it stung, while a clever jester would constantly test the boundaries of what was permissible. The jester also acted as a vital pressure release valve for the court. In environments where dissent was suppressed and grievances festered, the jester could voice in jest the frustrations of the common people or the unspoken criticisms of the courtiers. This allowed for a symbolic catharsis, a moment of collective laughter at shared annoyances, which could prevent more serious forms of unrest. It was a controlled explosion, a safe way to let off steam without overturning the whole system. You could grumble to the jester, knowing he might just turn it into a joke that the king himself would hear. Their physical presence also contributed to this challenge. While other courtiers might stand stiffly, constrained by protocol, the jester was free to move, to gesticulate, to interrupt, to tumble. This physical freedom mirrored their verbal freedom. Their very movements challenged the rigid formality of the court, breaking down the invisible barriers that separated the powerful from the ordinary. They were a disruptive force, in the best possible sense. Think about how this challenged the king's self-perception. Monarchs were often surrounded by propaganda that glorified their power and wisdom. The jester's jokes, however, brought them back down to earth, reminding them of their human fallibility. This humbling effect, while potentially irritating, was crucial for a balanced ruler. It prevented them from becoming utterly detached from reality, a dangerous state for any leader. Furthermore, jesters could subtly influence public opinion within the court itself by lampooning a corrupt minister or highlighting a flawed policy. They could turn the tide of opinion without ever explicitly engaging in political debate. Their jokes could plant seeds of doubt or solidify existing grievances, all while maintaining the veneer of harmless entertainment. They were the original social influencers, but with a much smaller following and a much higher personal risk. The relationship between the jester and other courtiers was also complex. While some might resent the jester's license, others might discreetly use them as a mouthpiece. A noble who wanted to criticize another but dared not do so directly might feed information or ideas to the jester, hoping the jester would weave it into their next performance. This made the jester a dangerous yet useful ally in the intricate web of courtly intrigue. It was a game of whispers and winks, where the jester often held the key. You can almost hear the nervous laughter in the hall when a jester started a particularly daring jest. There would be that moment of collective breath-holding, as everyone wondered, is this going too far? Will the king be angry? And if the king laughed, a sigh of relief would ripple through the room. But even if the king merely tolerated it, the message had been delivered, the challenge issued. However subtly, this ability to challenge authority, to speak truth to power, is perhaps the most enduring legacy of the medieval jester. It shows us that even in the most autocratic regimes, there existed an informal yet powerful mechanism for critique. It wasn't always effective, and it was certainly dangerous, but it existed. The jester was the constant, nagging conscience of the court, a reminder that even absolute power could be made to feel a little bit ridiculous. So, when you consider the medieval court jester, look beyond the simple act of making people laugh. See the courage, the intelligence, and the strategic brilliance required to wield humor as a tool for social commentary and political influence. They were the ultimate boundary pushers, the professional provocateurs who dared to mock the unmockable, challenging the very fabric of power, one witty remark at a time. And in doing so, they left an indelible mark on the history of both comedy and defiance. You've now seen how central the jester was to medieval court life, a blend of entertainment and covert influence, a master of wit who dared to challenge power. But like all things, the jester's era of prominence eventually began to wane. As the Middle Ages transitioned into the early modern period, you find the decline of the court jester becoming increasingly evident. The vibrant, indispensable figure we've explored starts to fade, becoming less common, less influential, and eventually a relic of a bygone age. Imagine the grand halls of power. But now, the laughter is less frequent, the jingle of bells a rarer sound. The reasons for this decline are complex and interwoven, stemming from profound shifts in European society, politics, and culture. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic disappearance, but a gradual erosion of their unique niche, a slow dimming of their once bright light. One of the most significant factors was the rise of the centralized absolute monarchy. As kings consolidated power, establishing more formalized bureaucracies and professionalized court structures, the informal, often anarchic role of the jester became less desirable. Monarchs increasingly valued order, decorum, and strict control over information. The jester's license to speak freely, once a sign of a secure ruler, began to be seen as a potential liability, a source of unpredictable dissent in an era striving for absolute control. An absolute monarch wanted absolute control over the narrative, and a jester, by their very nature, was a wild card. A mainstream historical fact that highlights this shift is the court of Louis XIV of France, the quintessential Sun King. While Louis XIV maintained a grand court and was a patron of the arts, the jester, as a figure of licensed criticism, had largely disappeared. Instead, he preferred elaborate ballets, operas, and highly formal theatrical productions designed to glorify the monarch and reinforce his power. The spontaneous, often subversive, humor of the jester had no place in such a meticulously choreographed display of absolute authority. The laughter at Versailles was refined, controlled, and certainly not at the king's expense. The increasing emphasis on reason and intellectualism during the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods also played a role. As Europe moved away from a worldview dominated by superstition and religious dogma towards one centered on human intellect and scientific inquiry, the natural fool became less revered and more marginalized. The wise fool archetype, while still resonating in literature, became less palatable in a court that prided itself on its rationality and sophistication. Jokes became more polished, humor more subtle, and the boisterous, often crude, antics of the traditional jester seemed increasingly out of step with the new intellectual currents. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, as the formal jester declined, some courts adopted the trend of keeping dwarves or giants as curiosities and symbols of status, rather than for their wit or comedic ability. These individuals, often seen as natural anomalies, became living ornaments, meant to impress visitors and demonstrate the monarch's wealth and ability to collect the unusual. While some might have possessed intelligence or a sense of humor, their primary role shifted from entertainer to exotic exhibit. It's a sad progression from respected wit to decorative oddity, a clear sign of the jester's original purpose being diluted. Historians still argue whether the decline of the jester was primarily due to changing monarchical attitudes, the rise of new forms of entertainment, or a societal shift away from the jester's unique brand of subversive humor. It's likely a confluence of all these factors. Just as technology displaces old jobs today, new forms of entertainment and social structures eventually made the jester redundant. The medieval variety show gave way to more specialized performances. The advent of the printing press also contributed, albeit indirectly. Information could now be disseminated more widely and formally, reducing the jester's role as an informal newsbearer or conduit for courtly gossip. Critical opinions, though still dangerous, could find outlets in pamphlets or satirical broadsides, rather than relying solely on the spoken, veiled jests of a fool. The jester's unique intelligence network became less vital as communication evolved. Furthermore, new forms of professional entertainment began to emerge and flourish. Theaters became more sophisticated, offering plays and comedies that catered to a broader audience, including the court. Professional actors, musicians, and playwrights began to fulfill the entertainment needs once partially met by the jester. These new performers operated under different rules, often with scripts and formal patronage, fitting better into the increasingly ordered court environment. Why rely on unpredictable improvisation when you can commission a meticulously crafted play? The increasing seriousness of court life, driven by religious conflicts like the Reformation and Counter-Reformation and constant warfare, also meant there was less appetite for outright buffoonery. Courts became more somber, more focused on political and military strategy. The space for light-hearted, often irreverent, humor diminished as the stakes of international diplomacy and religious schism grew higher. It's hard to make jokes when everyone's talking about burning heretics or imminent invasions. The very concept of folly itself began to change. While the medieval period often saw a mystical or even divine connection to foolishness, the early modern era increasingly viewed mental disability with pity and deliberate buffoonery as simply low-class or unrefined. The philosophical underpinnings that gave the wise fool his power started to erode, making the jester's mask less potent. The line between wisdom and actual foolishness became less blurred, and the jester was increasingly seen on the wrong side of it. You can almost feel the shift in atmosphere. The intimate, often rough-and-tumble nature of the earlier medieval courts gave way to the grand, formal, and self-consciously refined courts of the Renaissance and Baroque periods. The jester, with their often earthy humor and informal manner, simply didn't fit. They were too loud, too unpredictable, too medieval. The tradition didn't die out overnight, of course. Some monarchs continued to keep jesters, especially those who clung to older traditions or found genuine comfort in their presence. But these became increasingly rare exceptions rather than the norm. The jester became a curiosity, a nostalgic nod to a past era, rather than a vital, influential member of the royal household. They were like a beloved, but ultimately obsolete piece of antique furniture, the rise of the gentleman humorist or wit. In court also contributed to the jester's decline. These were often educated nobles who used their conversational skills and clever repartee to entertain the court, but within the bounds of strict etiquette and without the formal designation of fool. They provided sophisticated amusement without the jester's baggage of licensed irreverence, a much safer form of social interaction. So, the figure who once bravely delivered truth in a world of silence found their voice increasingly drowned out by the clamor of new political realities, new intellectual pursuits, and new forms of entertainment. The jingle of the jester's bells faded, replaced by the rustle of political documents, the flourish of operatic music, and the hushed whispers of courtly intrigue. It's a poignant end to a remarkable chapter of history, a reminder that even the most enduring roles can fall victim to the relentless march of time and societal change. The curtain was slowly, quietly, falling on the stage of the medieval fool. Even as the jester's physical presence in the royal court dwindled, their spirit, their archetype, refused to vanish. Instead, the jester, the wise fool, found new life, transforming and flourishing in literature and art. You see, the power of their symbolism transcended the physical court, becoming an enduring motif that continued to explore human nature, power, and folly on the pages of books and across canvases. Imagine you pick up a play in Elizabethan England or gaze upon a painting from the Dutch Golden Age. Suddenly, there, in the narrative or the brushstrokes, is a figure unmistakably reminiscent of our medieval jester, the motley, the knowing grin, the subtle subversion. This wasn't just artistic recycling. It was a recognition of the jester's profound ability to embody universal truths about society and the human condition. The fictional jester could do what their real-life counterparts increasingly couldn't: speak absolute truth without fear of banishment, because they existed in a world purely of the imagination. The most famous example, a mainstream historical fact that resonates through time, is undoubtedly William Shakespeare's profound use of the jester archetype. Think of Feste in Twelfth Night, Touchstone in As You Like It, or, most powerfully, King Lear's Fool. These are not mere comic relief characters. They are vital, intelligent figures who often speak the deepest truths, offer the shrewdest observations, and maintain a moral compass in a world gone mad. Lear's Fool, for instance, is Lear's last tether to sanity, constantly reminding him of his folly, even as the king descends into madness. He's the one character who truly dares to confront Lear's self-deception, using riddles and songs to deliver painful truths. You probably thought Shakespeare was just about star-crossed lovers. But his fools are where the real wisdom lies. Shakespeare, writing at a time when actual court jesters were becoming rarer, but still within living memory, captured the essence of their role: the freedom to speak plainly, the ability to see through pretense, and the tragic burden of often being the only sane voice in a chaotic world. His jesters are witty, melancholic, and deeply insightful, embodying the paradox of the wise fool more perfectly than any historical record could. For a quirky or fringe tidbit in some Renaissance literature, the jester figure was used to critique religious dogma or societal hypocrisy in ways that would have been outright dangerous for a real person. Authors could hide their own subversive ideas behind the jester's folly, attributing radical thoughts to a character who was, by definition, beyond reproach. It was a literary trick, allowing writers to push boundaries and explore controversial ideas without risking accusations of heresy or sedition. The jester became a safe vessel for dangerous thoughts, a kind of intellectual Trojan horse. Historians still argue whether the literary jester primarily served as a reflection of the historical reality of court fools, or if they became an idealized, more potent version of what the jester could have been, a symbol of absolute freedom of speech. Did writers simply draw from real life, or did they elevate the jester to a philosophical symbol beyond their practical reality? It's likely a bit of both. The real jesters provided the inspiration, but authors honed and refined the archetype to serve their own artistic and philosophical purposes. Beyond drama, the jester appeared frequently in prose and poetry. Satirical works often employed a jester-like narrator or character to comment on social ills, political corruption, or human foolishness. This literary device allowed authors to maintain a critical distance, attributing harsh criticisms to a fool figure, thereby lessening the risk of personal reprisal. It was a smart move, protecting the artist while still delivering a punch. Think about the visual arts. Painters often included jester figures in court scenes, not just as decorative elements, but to add depth and commentary. A jester might be depicted observing the main action with a knowing look, or standing slightly apart. Their colorful costume, a stark contrast to the more somber tones of the nobility, subtly suggesting their outsider status and unique perspective. Their exaggerated features and expressions could convey emotions and messages that were harder to portray in the stiff portraits of the powerful dot. The symbolism of the motley and bells became universally recognized. Even without a detailed explanation, an audience would instantly understand the character's role and implied freedom. This shorthand allowed artists to convey complex ideas about truth, illusion, and human nature with a single, recognizable figure. The jester became a kind of visual metaphor for critical thought and unconventional wisdom. You'll also find the jester in allegorical works, representing concepts like folly, wisdom, or the unpredictable nature of fate. They often appeared alongside figures like Death or Lady Fortune, emphasizing their role as a commentator on the grand human drama. Their ability to mock authority extended to mocking the very concept of human control over destiny, reinforcing their philosophical depth in art. The continuing appeal of the jester archetype in literature and art speaks to enduring human fascinations. We are drawn to figures who can speak truth to power, who challenge norms, and who remind us of our own absurdities. The jester, by embodying both wisdom and foolishness, represents the full spectrum of human experience, making them a rich and versatile subject for creative expression. You probably wouldn't survive a formal debate with a medieval scholar, but you definitely understand a jester's biting observation, the rise of the novel. Characters with jester-like qualities, witty, cynical, outsiders who observe and comment, became common. These characters, while not always explicitly called jesters, carried the torch of the wise fool, offering a critical lens through which to view the fictional worlds and their inhabitants. They allowed authors to explore social critique and character development in new, expansive ways. Even children's literature and folk tales embraced the jester figure, often as a trickster, or a clever underdog who outsmarts the powerful. This solidified the jester's place in popular culture, ensuring that the archetype would continue to be passed down through generations, long after the last real court jester had faded into history. The stories taught subtle lessons about questioning authority and valuing unconventional wisdom. The jester's literary and artistic legacy also highlights the enduring power of humor as a tool for social commentary. Even today, comedians and satirists draw upon the same fundamental principles employed by medieval jesters, using laughter to expose hypocrisy, to challenge injustice, and to make sense of a sometimes nonsensical world. The form might change, but the function remains remarkably consistent. So, while the king's actual fool might have been out of a job, the jester found a new stage, a new audience, and a new form of immortality in the realm of imagination. They became symbols, ideas, reflections of our deepest anxieties and aspirations. The artistic representation of the jester ensured that their unique brand of wisdom and folly would continue to provoke thought, inspire laughter, and remind us of the crucial role that unconventional voices play in challenging the status quo. The bells may have stopped jingling in the courts, but they echoed on in the pages of plays and on the walls of galleries, a silent yet powerful testament to their enduring significance. The final jingle of bells in the royal courts might have faded centuries ago, and the jester's motley might now only grace the pages of old books, but their spirit, their very essence, is far from gone. In fact, if you look closely at our modern world, you'll find that the medieval jester lives on, transformed and adapted, in the figures of clowns, comedians, and satirists. The fundamental human need for laughter, for truth spoken through jest, and for the challenging of norms ensures that the jester's legacy endures. Imagine you settle down to watch a stand-up comedy special, or you browse through a news satire show. The person on stage, microphone in hand, is doing precisely what the medieval jester did, observing the world, dissecting its absurdities, and delivering often uncomfortable truths wrapped in humor. The stage might be different, the audience larger, but the core function is strikingly similar. They are our contemporary truth-tellers, operating under a similar, albeit less physically perilous, license of laughter. Let's start with clowns. While modern circus clowns, with their exaggerated makeup and slapstick routines, might seem a direct descendant, the connection runs deeper. The traditional clown, especially the August or whiteface clown, often embodies a similar blend of innocence and knowingness as the medieval fool. They perform physical comedy, yes, but also create characters that highlight human foibles, often through exaggerated clumsiness or naive observations. A mainstream historical fact: the lineage from the medieval jester to the commedia dell'arte figures like Harlequin and Pulcinella, and then to the modern clown, is well documented by theater historians, showing a continuous evolution of the archetypal comedic figure performing for an audience. You can practically see the jester's bladder stick transform into a clown's oversized mallet. Then there are comedians, particularly stand-up comedians. These are perhaps the most direct modern equivalent of the jester. They stand alone before an audience, often with nothing but their wit, aiming to entertain, yes, but also to provoke thought. Their jokes often revolve around social commentary, political satire, and observations on the mundane absurdities of everyday life. The best comedians, like the best jesters, are incredibly astute observers of human behavior and power dynamics. They gauge the mood of the room, adapt their material on the fly, and push boundaries just far enough to elicit laughter without alienating their audience entirely. The feeling of nervous anticipation you get before a particularly edgy joke lands, that's the modern echo of a medieval court holding its breath as the jester pushed the limits. Consider the craft. Just as the medieval jester honed their wordplay, riddles, and storytelling, modern comedians meticulously craft their jokes, timing their punchlines, and developing their stage persona. They understand the psychological nuances of humor, when to be gentle, when to be aggressive, when to use self-deprecation, and when to go for the jugular. It's a sophisticated art form, much like the jesters, demanding intelligence, courage, and an almost superhuman ability to read a crowd. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, think about the roast tradition in modern comedy, where a public figure is subjected to a barrage of humorous, often biting, insults. This is a direct descendant of the jester's license to mock powerful individuals. The subject of the roast, like a medieval monarch allowing their jester to poke fun, signals their comfort with their own status and their ability to take a joke. It's a controlled ritual of social inversion, mirroring the jester's role in deflating ego and challenging pretense, but now played out on television or in large venues. You probably wouldn't survive being roasted by your actual medieval jester. But at least the modern version doesn't usually involve banishment. Historians still argue whether the transition from jester to modern comedian represents a linear progression of entertainment forms, or if it's more of a cultural reinvention, where the archetype simply finds new expressions. Is it truly the same role, or just a similar one adapting to new societal structures? Regardless, the functional similarities are undeniable. Both figures serve as social critics, entertainers and truth-tellers, leveraging humor as their primary tool. And then there are satirists, found in political cartoons, late-night television shows, and online commentary. These are the direct intellectual heirs of the jester's role as a political commentator. They use humor, irony, and exaggeration to critique governments, politicians, and societal trends. They highlight hypocrisy, expose corruption, and question authority, often in ways that direct, serious criticism cannot. The satirical newspaper, the political cartoonist, they are all carrying on the jester's tradition of speaking truth through the veil of laughter. Think about the impact. Just as the jester could subtly influence royal opinion, modern satirists shape public discourse, sometimes more effectively than traditional journalists. Their humor can make complex political issues digestible, provoke outrage, or simply offer a collective moment of exasperation. They are the unofficial watchdogs, the conscience of the public sphere. Much as the jester was the conscience of the court, the shift from private court entertainment to public performance is significant. While the medieval jester performed for a select few, modern comedians and satirists reach millions, even billions, through various media. This democratizes the jester's function, spreading their message and influence far beyond the walls of a castle. The power of the joke is no longer limited to the ears of a monarch. It can ripple through society, sparking conversation and even inspiring change. The dangers might be different, but they still exist. While modern comedians and satirists typically don't face execution for a bad joke, they can face public backlash, cancel culture, career ruin, or even legal challenges. There's still a line, albeit a more fluid one, that they must navigate. The pressure to be both funny and socially acceptable, or provocatively funny, is a constant tension. Much like the jesters need to avoid royal wrath, you see the common threads, the reliance on wit, the courage to speak uncomfortable truths, the ability to read and manipulate an audience's emotions, and the unique position as an outsider who offers an insider's view. These are the hallmarks of the jester, whether they wore motley and bells, or a tailored suit and held a microphone. The modern clown's foolishness, the comedian's self-deprecating humor, the satirist's exaggerated portrayals, these are all contemporary manifestations of the jester's mask. By adopting a persona of not being serious, they gain the freedom to say profoundly serious things. It's the same old trick, dressed in new clothes. So, the next time you laugh at a sharp joke, or nod in agreement with a biting piece of satire, remember the medieval court jester. They laid the groundwork for this vital form of social commentary and entertainment. They taught us that laughter isn't just about amusement. It's a powerful tool for understanding, for challenging, and for coping with the often absurd realities of life. The jester's legacy is alive and well, proving that the human need for a wise fool, for someone to point out when the emperor has no clothes, is truly timeless. You've traced the jester's journey from medieval courts to modern comedy stages, seeing how their spirit persists in our culture. Now, let's peel back another layer and consider the deeper reasons why monarchs, and indeed entire societies, kept jesters around. It goes beyond mere entertainment. It delves into the jester's psychological impact on the court and, crucially, on the ruler themselves. This is about more than just a good laugh. It's about power, vulnerability, and the intricate workings of the human mind under immense pressure. Imagine you are a monarch in the heart of the medieval era. Perhaps Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine or King Richard the Lionheart. Your life is one of immense responsibility, constant intrigue, and often profound isolation. Every decision you make carries monumental weight. War or peace, famine or plenty, life or death for your subjects. You are surrounded by courtiers who constantly seek favor, who flatter, and who rarely, if ever, offer genuinely unbiased opinions. In this suffocating atmosphere, the jester became an invaluable psychological tool. One primary psychological impact was tension release. Court life was incredibly formal and stressful. The constant adherence to etiquette, the rigid hierarchy, the ever-present threat of political machinations, and the weight of governance created immense psychological pressure. The jester, with their antics and humor, provided a vital outlet, a release valve for this pent-up tension. Their ability to break decorum, to introduce chaos into order, allowed everyone, from the lowliest servant to the highest noble, a moment to breathe, to laugh, and to momentarily forget the anxieties of their lives. It was like a medieval stress ball, but far more entertaining. A mainstream historical fact highlighting this is the jester's role in diffusing potentially violent situations. Accounts from various European courts suggest that a well-timed jest could halt an argument between feuding nobles, or even distract an enraged monarch, preventing rash decisions or physical altercations. For instance, there are stories of jesters deliberately tripping or making a ridiculous noise during a heated debate, momentarily shattering the tension and allowing tempers to cool. This wasn't just amusing, it was a form of psychological intervention, a way to reset the emotional temperature of the room. You probably wouldn't survive trying to intervene in a medieval bar fight without a few jester tricks up your sleeve. Another crucial psychological function was reality checking. Monarchs were often insulated in a bubble of flattery and self-importance. The jester, by humorously pointing out flaws, absurdities, and inconsistencies, served as a crucial connection to reality. They could, without directly insulting, remind the king that even he was mortal, that his plans could go awry, and that his advisors weren't always infallible. This subtle grounding effect was essential for preventing hubris and maintaining a healthy perspective, even for the most powerful individuals. It was the medieval equivalent of a candid friend who tells you when you've got spinach in your teeth, but with more dramatic flair. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, some scholars suggest that jesters unconsciously tapped into the human need for social transgression and forbidden thoughts. In a society with strict moral and social codes, the jester was allowed to dabble in the profane, the taboo, and the subversive. They could make jokes about sex, bodily functions, or even religious figures in ways that others couldn't. This offered a vicarious release for the court, allowing them to laugh at things they wouldn't dare utter themselves, providing a psychological outlet for suppressed desires and anxieties. It's like watching a really edgy stand-up special today. You laugh because someone dares to say what you're thinking but wouldn't articulate. Historians still argue whether the jester's psychological impact was a conscious, calculated strategy by monarchs to maintain stability, or an emergent property of the unique jester-patron relationship. Was it a deliberate form of royal self-therapy, or simply a beneficial side effect? It's likely a mix. Monarchs instinctively understood the benefit of having someone who could make them laugh and offer honest feedback, even if they didn't articulate it in modern psychological terms. The jester also provided a form of emotional companionship. Leading a kingdom could be a profoundly lonely experience. Monarchs faced immense pressure and often lacked true confidants. The jester, as we discussed, often filled this void, offering a safe space for the monarch to express vulnerabilities, anxieties, and frustrations without fear of judgment or political exploitation. This emotional outlet was crucial for the monarch's mental well-being, providing a much-needed human connection in an otherwise isolated existence. Imagine having to make decisions of life and death, day in and day out, with no one truly to confide in except the person who jingles. Their role as a mirror was also psychologically significant. Through their imitations and parodies, jesters could subtly reflect the behaviors and mannerisms of courtiers and even the monarch back to them. This forced self-reflection, allowing individuals to see themselves, perhaps for the first time, through the eyes of an impartial, albeit humorous, observer. It could be uncomfortable, but also incredibly insightful, fostering a degree of self-awareness that might otherwise be impossible to achieve in a world of constant flattery. Furthermore, the jester's ability to embody and represent folly had a profound psychological effect. By having a designated fool in court, society could, in a controlled way, acknowledge and integrate the irrational, the absurd, and the chaotic aspects of human existence. In a world striving for order and divine reason, the jester was a reminder that chaos and irrationality were also fundamental parts of life. This psychological acceptance of folly perhaps made the overwhelming realities of the medieval world slightly more manageable. The element of unpredictability the jester brought was also psychologically stimulating. Court life could be monotonous and predictable. The jester shattered this monotony, injecting moments of spontaneous joy, surprise, or even mild shock. This kept the court mentally engaged and provided a much-needed break from routine, preventing stagnation and boredom, which can themselves be psychologically draining. You can almost feel the tension lifting in the great hall when the jester entered, the collective sigh of relief, the immediate shift in posture, the anticipation of a break from the tedious formalities. These were all psychological responses to the jester's presence. They were a necessary disruption, a welcome anomaly in a rigidly structured world. The jester's presence also provided a subtle form of social control. By allowing a designated figure to mock and criticize, the court provided an outlet for grievances that might otherwise escalate into more serious forms of rebellion or discontent. It was a controlled environment for airing grievances, a way to manage potential social unrest by allowing it to dissipate through laughter rather than violence. It's like letting off steam from a boiling pot before it explodes. Finally, the jester often served as a living reminder of the fragility of status and the universality of human experience. Regardless of rank, everyone was susceptible to the jester's gaze. Everyone could be the target of a joke. This subtly leveled the playing field, if only for a moment, reminding the powerful that beneath their robes and titles, they were still just human, prone to the same follies and absurdities as everyone else. This shared humanity, exposed through laughter, could foster a strange kind of bond within the court, however fleeting so. The next time you think about medieval jesters, look beyond the surface. Consider the deep psychological needs they fulfilled, the emotional burdens they lightened, and the crucial role they played in keeping their powerful patrons grounded, sane, and connected to a reality that so few dared to show them. Their impact wasn't just on the court's amusement, but on its very psychological well-being. You've journeyed through the European courts, tracing the jester's rise, fall, and enduring psychological impact. But to truly appreciate the wise fool archetype, you need to expand your gaze beyond the castles of England and France. Because, remarkably, figures analogous to the medieval jester existed and still exist in diverse cultures across the globe. These cultural variations of the fool reveal a universal human need for humor, social commentary, and a designated truth-teller, regardless of geography or historical period. Imagine yourself now, not in a European great hall, but perhaps in a bustling market square in ancient China, or a vibrant tribal gathering in North America, or a spiritual ceremony in West Africa. In each setting, you might encounter a figure who, though different in attire and specific customs, fulfills a role strikingly similar to our beloved jester. They are the ones who can speak inconvenient truths, break tension, and offer a unique perspective, often through humor, trickery, or even sacred transgression. Let's start with the Native American sacred clown, or heyoka. This is a particularly fascinating and profound parallel. The heyoka, often found in Lakota and other Plains Indian cultures, is not just an entertainer. They are a spiritual figure whose behavior is inverted or contrary to social norms. They do everything backward, riding horses, facing backward, saying yes when they mean no, or crying when everyone else laughs. This seemingly nonsensical behavior serves a deep purpose: to challenge perceptions, to remind people of the arbitrary nature of rules, to highlight hypocrisy, and to facilitate spiritual understanding through unconventional means. A mainstream historical fact, the heyoka's role was often linked to visions of thunder and lightning, symbolizing their connection to powerful, unpredictable forces. Their contrariness wasn't simply for amusement. It was a sacred duty, a way to teach by inversion. They used humor and paradox to reveal deeper truths about the universe and human nature. You probably wouldn't survive trying to understand a heyoka without embracing a healthy dose of paradox and challenging your own assumptions. Think about the psychological impact here. The heyoka forces their community to constantly question their assumptions, to look at things from an entirely different angle. This prevents rigid thinking and encourages adaptability, vital qualities for survival. Their humor, often absurd and shocking, serves to break down mental barriers, opening minds to new possibilities and challenging established norms in a gentle yet profound way. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, in some indigenous cultures, the sacred clown might exaggerate hunger during a feast, only to secretly distribute food to the truly needy, or publicly shame a respected elder for minor transgressions in a humorous way. Their actions, while seemingly disruptive, ultimately reinforced community values and social cohesion, acting as a living conscience. Their methods were unconventional, but their underlying purpose was deeply moral and communal. Historians and anthropologists still argue whether these fool figures in non-European cultures developed independently or if there was some limited cross-cultural influence. The striking similarities, despite vast geographical distances, suggest a universal human need for such roles, implying that the archetype of the wise fool is deeply embedded in the human psyche. It's a testament to the idea that laughter and truth are powerful, universal forces in ancient China. While not jesters in the European sense, court figures known as jokers or entertainers, yuren, existed. These individuals often employed humor, satire, and clever storytelling to advise emperors and express veiled criticisms. They were known for their quick wit and ability to communicate difficult truths through parables or seemingly innocent jokes, much like our European jesters. One famous example is Dongfang Shuo, a court jester to Emperor Wu of Han, known for his vast knowledge and ability to use humor to offer political commentary. Similarly, in parts of Africa, traditional societies often had figures who, through storytelling, dance, and song, could playfully mock authority, mediate disputes, or offer social critique. These weren't necessarily full-time court jesters, but they filled a similar functional niche within the community, acting as informal commentators and tension relievers. Their humor was often rooted in proverbs, fables, and a deep understanding of local customs and personalities. In ancient India, the figure of the Vidushaka in Sanskrit drama served a similar purpose. The Vidushaka was typically a Brahmin priest who, despite his high caste, was depicted as a comic foil to the hero, often appearing foolish, gluttonous, and socially inept. However, he also possessed intelligence and was allowed to offer blunt, even impudent, advice to the king and to comment satirically on the events of the play. His foolishness was a dramatic device that permitted him to speak truths others couldn't. You see the recurring patterns, the ability to speak freely, the use of humor as a shield, the position as an outsider-insider, and the capacity to reveal uncomfortable truths. These figures, regardless of their cultural context, operated within a delicate balance, leveraging their perceived folly or sacred status to maintain a unique form of influence. They were the essential counterpoint to rigid social structures, providing flexibility and a much-needed critical perspective. The very existence of these diverse fool figures highlights the universal psychological need for healthy social critique and a mechanism to diffuse tension. Every human society, it seems, instinctively understands the danger of unchecked power and the importance of having someone who can call out the absurdities of life, even if they have to do it through a laugh. The fact that these roles often existed in traditional, pre-literate societies is particularly telling. It shows that the need for a jester-like figure is not dependent on complex societal structures or advanced forms of entertainment. It's a fundamental human inclination, a basic social requirement. These figures were, in essence, early forms of community self-correction, ensuring that power didn't become too arrogant and that people didn't lose their ability to laugh at themselves. Even in modern, non-Western cultures, you can find echoes of the jester. Think of the stand-up comedians in countries with strict censorship who use subtle humor and veiled allusions to critique their governments, or the satirical puppetry and street theater that emerges in times of political upheaval. These are all continuing the legacy of the wise fool, adapting the jester's tactics to new contexts and new forms of media. So, broaden your perspective beyond the European castles. The jingle of the Jesters' bells, in its various forms, echoes across continents and through centuries, from the sacred clowns of indigenous tribes to the wise jesters of ancient emperors. The archetype of the fool who speaks truth is a testament to our shared humanity, our universal need for laughter, and our enduring desire for someone to remind us that even the most powerful among us are, at the end of the day, just people prone to folly. It's a truly global phenomenon, and one that continues to resonate today. You've journeyed with me through the remarkable history of the jester, from the medieval courts of Europe to their global variations and modern echoes. Now, as our journey nears its gentle close, let's consider the most profound and enduring aspect of the jester's legacy, the enduring allure of folly. Why, across millennia and cultures, does the archetype of the wise fool continue to fascinate us? What is it about this figure that resonates so deeply long after the last reel court jester has hung up their motley? Imagine you are pondering this very question, perhaps late at night, the quiet hum of your fan a steady counterpoint to your thoughts. The jester's appeal isn't just about cheap laughs or historical curiosity. It taps into something fundamental about the human condition, our perpetual struggle with truth and illusion, power and vulnerability, sanity and madness. The jester, by embodying the paradox of wisdom in foolishness, offers us a unique lens through which to view ourselves and the world. One of the primary reasons for this enduring allure is the jester's ability to represent unfettered truth. In every society, there are unspoken rules, uncomfortable realities, and powerful figures who are rarely challenged. The jester, by operating outside these norms, became a symbol of radical honesty. They could say what others only dared to think, using humor as a shield and folly as a disguise. This makes them eternally appealing, because who among us doesn't wish, at times, they could speak their mind without consequence? The jester lives out that fantasy for us. A mainstream historical fact that underscores this is the concept of licensed folly. This wasn't just a quaint custom. It was a deliberate societal construct that acknowledged the need for a mechanism to deliver unpalatable truths. The existence of this license, however fragile, highlights a profound recognition by those in power that they needed someone to hold a mirror up to their own flaws, however distorted that mirror might be. The allure lies in the audacious freedom this license implied. Consider the cathartic release the jester provides. Life, particularly in the medieval world, was often rigid, hierarchical, and full of pretense. The jester offered a moment of delightful chaos, a playful subversion of order. Their antics, their willingness to be crude or irreverent, allowed audiences to vicariously experience a release from the stifling formality and the constant pressure of social expectations. It's like a breath of fresh, slightly mischievous air. You probably wouldn't survive a day of medieval court etiquette without a jester to break the tension for a quirky or fringe tidbit in some philosophical traditions. The fool is seen as being closer to ultimate truth precisely because they are unburdened by conventional wisdom or societal conditioning. Their mind is supposedly open to insights that the wise overlook due to their rigid adherence to established norms. This idea, often found in ancient Greek philosophy and later echoed in Renaissance thought, posits folly not as a deficit, but as a different path to understanding, a kind of radical innocence that sees things as they truly are. It suggests that sometimes, to understand the deepest truths, you have to let go of what you think you know. Historians and literary scholars still argue whether the Jester's allure is primarily about their comedic function or their deeper philosophical implications. Are we drawn to them because they make us laugh, or because they make us think? The beauty, of course, is that they do both. The laughter is the gateway, allowing the deeper insights to slip past our defenses and challenge our preconceptions. The Jester also appeals to our innate human desire for justice and accountability. In a world where the powerful often seemed untouchable, the Jester's ability to mock them, to highlight their misdeeds or their foolishness, provided a sense of balance. It was a symbolic act of holding power to account, a small victory for the underdog, and a reminder that even kings could be ridiculous. This resonates deeply within us, as we still seek ways to challenge authority and expose hypocrisy in our own times. Think about the psychological complexity of the wise fool, this paradox: someone who appears foolish but is secretly wise challenges our simplistic categories and forces us to look beyond appearances. It's a compelling figure because it reminds us that wisdom can come from unexpected places, and that true intelligence isn't always about formal education or high status. Sometimes it's about seeing the world with a fresh, unblinkered eye. The Jester's ability to navigate danger with wit is also incredibly captivating. Their constant tightrope walk between favor and disgrace, their reliance on quick thinking and charm to survive, speaks to a primal human fascination with resilience and cleverness in the face of adversity. We admire their courage, their audacity, and their sheer brilliance in such a perilous environment. It's a thrilling, vicarious experience of high-stakes improvisation. Furthermore, the Jester represents a crucial form of social intelligence. They were masters of reading people, understanding unspoken dynamics, and manipulating emotions through humor. This skill, timeless and universally valuable, makes them compelling figures because they embody a profound understanding of human nature and social interaction. They teach us, often unconsciously, about the power of observation and the subtle art of communication. The Jester's connection to the carnivalesque and the inversion of norms also holds a strong allure. In many cultures, there are traditions of temporary social inversion, where hierarchies are overturned and the common person can mock the elite. The Jester brought a touch of this liberating, boundary-breaking spirit into the everyday rigidity of court life. This temporary suspension of rules, this embrace of playful chaos, is deeply satisfying to the human psyche, providing a vital escape from the pressures of conformity. You can sense the ongoing fascination in popular culture, from the villainous, chaotic clowns in modern cinema who embody a dark side of folly, to the beloved comedic characters who offer heartfelt wisdom. The archetype continues to be reinterpreted and explored. We are constantly drawn to figures who defy easy categorization, who embody contradictions, and who force us to confront uncomfortable truths, all while keeping us entertained. The Jester's lasting appeal is also a testament to the enduring power of laughter itself. Laughter is therapeutic, a unifying force, and a powerful tool for coping with adversity. The Jester reminds us that even in the darkest times, humor can offer solace, perspective, and a sense of shared humanity. Their very existence was a celebration of the human capacity for joy, even in the face of suffering. So, as we conclude our deep dive into the secret lives of medieval court jesters, remember that their story is not just a dusty chapter in history. It's a living, breathing testament to the enduring human need for a figure who can speak truth to power, challenge our perceptions, and remind us of the profound wisdom that can be found in the most unexpected places, especially within the guise of folly. The jingle of those medieval bells may be silent, but the resonance of their message continues to echo, a timeless invitation to look beyond the surface, to question, and to laugh. This indicates the completion of the 15 sections. As per the original instructions, 14 sections of content, plus a final wind down, which in the overall structure includes the reflection on the enduring allure as the last content piece before the soft close. The prompt requested 15 numbered sections, and the previous response marked the end of the script, fulfilling that requirement. There is no next section to continue to